Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this installment of Coffee with the Collections. I'm Taylor McKeown, the collections curator at the South Dakota Art Museum, and I'm joined by Abigail Ramsbottom, the curator of education, and we're both very happy to have South Dakota State University President Harvey Dunn as our guest today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Taylor and Abigail.
Yeah. Coffee with Collections is really an informal way for our virtual audience members to see objects that are in collection storage that aren't on display right now, to learn about the objects and the artists and what's in the collection and why we collect what we collect. Today we're featuring a few pieces that have connections to President Dunn that are some favorites, I think. I'll do a brief introduction of each piece. And then Abby and I together will chat with President Dunn. So first, just a bit of housekeeping. Please make sure that your mics are muted throughout the program. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. We should have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. So first, we're going to talk about Rough Country, this painting by Harvey Dunn that's between President Dunn and I. And we'll be sharing screen here so you can see a closer image of it. Many of us know Harvey Dunn as a native son of South Dakota and one of the state's premier artists. He was born to homesteaders in Kingsbury County in 1884. And came to Brookings in 1901. He was a student at what was then the South Dakota Agricultural College, now SDSU. And he later admitted that really he only enjoyed the art courses. I think that's the primary reason he wanted to study here, and studied under Ada Caldwell, who really saw his talent and encouraged him to go on to the Art Institute of Chicago. And then he ended up studying under leading American illustrator Howard Pyle in Delaware. And by the age of 22, just 4 years after leaving South Dakota, he had his own studio in Delaware and became one of the leading American illustrators, and really had a long career. He passed away in 1952. In 1950, Dunn brought a large collection of his work back to South Dakota. He had been visiting in the summers, starting in the 1920s, coming back, and had started this informal series of what we know as the prairie paintings. Rough Country is one of those. And that collection of paintings that he brought back to DeSmet in 1950, he donated to the state of South Dakota. And they were housed at SDSU in the Student Union from 1950 until 1970, when we opened and the Dunn collection became the first acquisition to our permanent collection. So at that time, I think we had about 50 Dunns in the collection. We're now at 145. So we've been collecting Dunn ever since. So yeah, we have Rough Country. I know it's one of President Dunn's favorites, and I think Abigail, you have some questions.
Yeah, so we can start with the simple question of what about this piece draws you in?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Art Museum staff for having me. It's really a treat. I really pretty excited about this. I present myself as a person who loves art, but let's leave it at that. I'm certainly not an expert at all. But this painting, along with the Sunlit Hills, have always been my favorites. And there's probably two kind of reasons. One's very pragmatic, in that I spent a great deal of my life in a situation like the cowboy on the picture finds himself. So in West River, South Dakota, where it's much rougher, there's a painting of our family ranch that shows hills very rough like this, that was done in the 1950s. But so the image just draws me in from the pragmatic part of I lived that life, and I had that experience of that cowboy. And then, well, there's probably three parts to this. The other thing that I've noticed is that this was a theme, this kind of lone cowboy, lone individual, and then this enormous landscape was also a theme for Frederick Remington and Charlie Russell. And so there are many Russells and Remingtons where it's either a trapper or a cowboy or an American Indian in the same type of setting. But the one that another real favorite of mine is a painting by an artist in Texas, Tom Lee, who is very famous in Texas and a tremendous artist, and he lived to be about 100, and he has a painting called The Hills of Mexico, and it's almost identical to this, and I'm sure they never, I can't imagine that they ever, that Tom Lee knew about Harvey Dunn's picture, but so it's this theme that I really enjoy, and what I really, for me, what it expresses is this existential experience that I think everyone has in their life of where do I belong, and you know, this singular person with this world that's in front of them that's daunting and cold and harsh and big and unknown. So I think those are the reasons, Abigail, that I love this painting so much.
Lovely. Yeah, and you kind of mentioned the landscape, but looking at this piece, we don't know the exact location of where this was painted or what scene it is. But when you look at it, do you see West River, South Dakota, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a tremendous, I've always wondered that. I thought maybe you guys knew. I would say it's in the Cheyenne River and Missouri Hills, so it'd be northwest of Pierre. There's country as the Cheyenne River comes in from the west, there's some really spectacular country as the Cheyenne River would then enter the Missouri. And you can see the Missouri River in Charlie Russell's pictures too, where you can just, I thought that Charlie was painting in South Dakota and it was all the Montana hills that he was painting. But that's where I would guess it is that country northwest of Pierre, up in that Cheyenne River country. So that I've been in not many times, ridden through it, but I don't know, certainly don't know the exact spot.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll move on to the next object, which actually this next object we don't have on site, really for an exciting reason. So this is, you'll see an image here of Oscar Howe with SDSU President Hilton Briggs, and Howe is presenting a painting titled Dakota Medicine Man to the university in 1968. Howe was given an honorary degree that year and presented this to the university, and it later entered the museum collection. But it's currently not on site because it's on loan for a retrospective of Howe's work, which recently was exhibited in New York at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, and it opens in Portland next month, and we're excited to host the exhibit next summer from June to September. So like Howe, I think a lot of our audience members are really familiar with, or like Dunn, I think a lot of our audience members are familiar with Howe. He was a Yanktonai Dakota artist born in 1915 at Joe Creek on the Crow Creek Reservation. And he really committed his artistic career to the preservation and ongoing representation of his culture. And certainly he challenged the art world's notions of what Native art was, and inspired both a generation of artists a bit younger than him. He was a longtime professor at the University of South Dakota. And I think there's definitely ripple effects with the generation of Native artists after, both in South Dakota and much further afield. This is an image of the work. Like I said, we don't have it on site right now because it's in this wonderful exhibition, and there's a wonderful catalog that goes with the exhibition too. Dakota Modern, which is in our museum store. And as I said, put it on your calendars to come and visit us next summer to see this show. It's a wonderful representation of his work.
Yes, and to bring some questions in. So what about how story and this work in particular is exciting to you?
Well, thanks, Abigail. I think I'll do my own little retrospective here. So 51 years ago, I was a freshman at SDSU. The museum was a year old, and I was going through that experience that all college freshmen do, where you're kind of all that existential experience, maybe all alone in a strange place. And I was wandering around campus on a weekend, and I came into the art museum not really knowing about it. And the exhibit, and so it was a fraction of what we have now, right? It was just the northern part of what now is the museum. And there was this exhibit of Oscar Howe, and I, serendipity here 50 years later talking about that experience, and I just fell in love with it. And so my Native American background through my grandfather, had sensitized me to American Indian art, and the museum in St. Francis, where I'd seen just a lot of more primitive art, but also some Sioux pottery was made in Mission a lot back in the 1950s and 60s. And so I had this certainly some knowledge or appreciation of what was going on. And I was reading Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee at the same time, first time I'd had that. So this 18-year-old comes in with Bury My Heart in one hand, big kind of an Oscar Howe in the other. And it just kind of blew my mind, to tell you the truth. It just was so shockingly beautiful, and really just an amazing, I just remember just being fascinated by it, amazed by it, and remain that way today, and can't wait for next summer. So we're really excited about it. I think this piece in particular, with that medicine man image, the power in the Native American culture and community, that as I've read, the power of that individual within the tribe. Talk a lot about chiefs or the role of the women, but this spiritual part that these individuals played. The turtle in the center is a fertility symbol in Dakota, especially the Dakota Lakota art. And so I think that's interesting. I don't know what he was conjuring up there, but I think that it's just a fascinating piece. And then the other thing I think that always amazes me is how those earth tones, from the gold and the yellow into the red and the burnt color below, just really those earthy tones really do always attract me. So that's what I just love it. So it's great. So.
Yeah, and so kind of from your story, it sounds like coming into this museum, it kind of gave you a sense of place.
Oh yeah, that would be what it did.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
and do you remember, was this work in particular on display?
I don't remember the particular. I was just shocked. I mean, from the primitive work that I'd seen to this was like this. But I think what Howe did just generationally, where he is probably, I don't mean to, he almost legitimized Native American artists as not, because his early work in the 1940s and 50s is quite realistic. Would that be, he's the images, the people are very visible and rather simple, and to this really, whatever happened, that he jumped to this tremendously artistic modern view, I think is an amazing transformation. As an artist, maybe you know more, Taylor, than I do about that.
Not an artist, but yeah, I think that's a great interpretation. And the thing I love about what you've talked about is that has stuck with you that long, and that a museum experience can do that for you. And we hope that SDSU students and students across South Dakota see the museum as a resource for engagement and exploration. And there's Howe work up now, so we hope that SDSU students will come and see it.
Yeah, I think the putting in, when the museum had the addition put on, I think having the classroom in the facility was brilliant. Whoever had a part in that design, because it gets kids in here into the museum and kind of getting them maybe through part of the gallery. And it might be, I'm sure they break some rules on coffee and some other things probably. But getting them in here is so important to understand the university holistically. I think is important.
Yeah, I agree. And we really do have so many students coming through every day because of that classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hope that they look up and are awestruck, maybe in the same way you were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, should we move on to our next piece?
Yeah.
So next up is a ledger drawing titled "These Horses Fly" by Donald Montileaux, and it's behind us here and on your screen. Montileaux was born on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and he lives and works in Rapid now. He studied at the Institute of American Indian Arts and at Black Hills State College in Spearfish. He was inducted into the South Dakota Hall of Fame in 2014. And I think he particularly really credits both Howe and Herman Red Elk, who are two artists represented in the collection, with giving him a sense of identity as a Lakota person and having a really important impact on the trajectory of his career. So this drawing was purchased from the South Dakota Governor's Biennial with funding from the South Dakota Arts Council and our Museum Guild. And I wanted to read a statement from Montileaux, actually, that was in the biennial catalog about his ledger art. He says, "Ledger art was not an art form many people were familiar with until recently. It had revitalized interest in the 1980s and has gained popularity since. The advent of this Plains Indian art form actually grew out of misery. The Lakota's transition from painting on hides to drawing on ledger paper reflects their drastic change from a nomadic tribe on the open plains to a sedentary lifestyle on the reservation. They lost their hunting grounds, freedom, and traditional lifestyles in the move. During this transition, and with the near elimination of buffalo, they were forced to use materials that were available to them at the time. Lakota people bartered for discarded ledger accounting books to create drawings depicting the history and culture of the people." I wanted to use Don's words there.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think Don's a good friend of mine, and I just so appreciative of that thoughtful piece. I remember that from that when it was in the governor's, and I just think it's a perfect. I hope everybody gets to read that and know that, because I think that's still not well known about what ledger art really is.
Yeah, do you want to speak a little bit about your friendship with Don Lalo and the relationship you all formed?
Yeah, I've gotten to know Don real well over the last few years, probably 10 years. I got to know him at some art shows and admired his work, and just a fascinating personal story of achievement too. You know, from the artist to, you know, his years as working in the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center, first as a janitor, I think, and then moving up into some management, but just a really humble story, and the whole time raising a very strong family, but maintaining his art, and then really with his retirement, I think as an artist, he's just really blossomed in this brilliance now of his work. His work's very, very popular, and he's very prolific, and so I just think he's an incredible individual and an incredible artist. I think the thing that there's two parts for this piece and his work that really strikes me is the energy that he's able to portray so well through, of course, his horses, but also in other pieces, his bison, or some just tremendous works of kind of warriors on horseback. But these 7 horses just have so much energy and so much life. And I think for me, and I guess probably why it was acquired, is that energy and that the horses bring, and the beauty of how they flow, and on top of that kind of bitter historical past that is represented by the ledgers that Don has found, is just a tremendous statement in itself. And it's really struck me that he has the courage to do that, to bring the life and the beauty and the culture, but not let us forget some of the harsher parts of our past. And I think he does it beautifully and brilliantly. So for me personally, I always look for the dates on the ledgers to see this. One of my favorites is 1891, which is the year my grandfather was born. There's several with 1890, which was, the Wounded Knee Massacre year. He's done a nice job of not only his tremendous artwork, but also taking that even a more thoughtful step in how he chooses the ledgers that he uses. So I think it's amazing art.
Yeah, beautifully said. And obviously this is a work in our collection, but Don Lalo is not only at the South Dakota Art Museum. His work is featured at the American Indian Student Center here. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that work came to be?
Right. So when we were planning the American Indian Student Center on campus, I asked Don if he would do a mural for us, and he said no. He said, I don't do murals. He said, I do ledger art. So he worked with a friend, Kenny Putman, that some of us remember from the Red Willow Band, a fiddler. So he worked with Kenny, who did a tremendous job of blowing up these ledger pieces, which I just got framed and have to bring over to you. So the originals that should be part of your collection, or our collection. So, but the first, as you walk into the American Indian Student Center, up on the right is our horses running across, and it's very similar to this piece, which I just loved it that you picked it today. Yeah, so you can see the horses running, and that's really about bringing that. For me, I was, and Don and I worked a lot on this, talked through everything about this, about what we were trying to accomplish, and trying to bring energy and excitement, and those horses do that. They do it in the work that we're showing today, and they do it in the American Indian Student Center. And then as students would leave the center from the main door, we put an encampment up that Don did, and it's very bright and beautiful, and it's got people, and there's a man and a woman courting, and there's 2 warriors, and it's just a terrific piece. And so as you leave the center, you go into the camp, you go into the community, and that's what we were trying to portray. Don portrayed. I just had the idea. But so as you leave the American Indian Student Center, Ben Rifle Dormitory, and Ben Rifle was American Indian, and an alumni, and Poobah of the Hobo Committee, I think. And then there's the Abbott Hall, which was Abbott was African-American student at SDSU. And then the third dorm that you just walk right into is the dorm named after Bella Spencer, who was the first American Indian advisor at SDSU that we know of anyway. So it's really neat, I think, that you walk from the American Indian Student Center into that part of the campus, but it's right into the heart of campus. And that was what we were trying to, that's what we were trying to get people, the students to think about.
Thoughtful and cohesive design. That's amazing.
So it's been fun, really fun.
Yeah. Well, and architecture is so important. It really affects how you exist in a space, and kind of ties into this like existential idea you were bringing up, that when people feel a sense of place, they feel like they have the opportunity to explore, to grow, change. So it is, it's impeccable.
Yeah, that's really, it's really, you're much smarter than I am, Abigail, because really that's, if I was experiencing that as a youth, the kind of loneliness wandering on campus, what I was trying to do 50 years later was to address that maybe, and to bring excitement, and that they have a place here on campus.
Yeah.
So that's neat.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Well, did you have any follow-up questions?
I think that's all wonderful. I do want to invite our virtual audience to drop any questions or comments in the chat, and I think Carolyn will relay those to us. We should have 10 or 15 minutes here. Questions.
There aren't any now, but I hope people are writing.
Well, we have one. It says from Rachel Funk at the Brookings Arts Council, said it only occurred to me earlier this morning, but is there any relation between Barry Dunn and Harvey Dunn?
Yeah, the only relationship is that, well, thanks for the question, Rachel. The only relationship is that my nickname on campus when I was a student was Harvey. So, no, there's no blood relationship, and I'm not an artist at all, but I admire, I've always loved his work. So thanks for the question. But my friends still call me Harv. So my friends from college.
And then I'd like to share a message that was sent to me directly from Tawa Ducheneau. She said, Don Montileaux is so awesome. He still wears his colored pencils down to about 2 inches and then gives them to little ones. He gave a bundle to my son one time when he was about 7. So what a cool story, Tawa. Thanks so much for sharing.
One thing we did chat about before the program started was kind of your childhood museum going experiences and your family background with art making. Would you like to talk to that?
Yeah, my mother was a tremendous artist. She worked in fabrics, but so she did every type of needlepoint and knitting, and but also was a prolific weaver. So she didn't like spinning or carding and spinning, but she could. And then she could take wool, card it, spin it, and then weave it into a bolt of cloth. And then out of that bolt of cloth, she would she made many baby blankets for all her grandchildren and grandnieces and nephews. But she also would take a bolt of cloth and make it into a woman's suit for usually my sister. But anyway, she was a great artist and very beautiful, and had great touch for an eye for colors and putting them together. My sister, who's sadly not well anymore, but also spent her life in art, had an art degree in college and painted and did a lot of art throughout her life. And so and then my parents, it sounds kind of strange knowing my background, but my parents were very intentional about getting the 4 of us, there were 4 kids, So we went to the Museum of Modern Art in Chicago, or the Art Institute of Chicago. We went to New York City once, and went to the I think I told you too.
The moment there.
Yeah,
The Museum of
yeah,
Modern Art there.
Museum of Modern Art in New York. So anyway, they tried really hard to expand our visions beyond our toys and our silliness. So it's fun.
Here's a question, wondering what your favorite piece in your home collection is.
Well, I really only have, I have some original, I have two Don Montileaux that I purchased from Don. And one is of a warrior, just a singular warrior on a horse, shooting a bow. And that's, I have it on, as I leave the, our president's home every morning, that's the picture that I see. So to give me energy
Yeah.
to get to work, and keep after this. But I think my favorite is, Oscar Howe in his early period painted a picture, and I only have a print, and it's of the teacher, and it's of a elder in a circle with children running around, and he's teaching about the Dakota Massacre. And so that's my favorite, I think. I loved teaching. I love my job now, but teaching was really, really inspirational and really a great experience. So I love that teacher picture. But I only have a print.
I'm not familiar with that one. I'll have to
Come
look it
over.
up.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it.
I have it in my office.
Okay.
Yeah, should have brought it over.
Any last minute questions? Anything else from you, Abby?
You know, we could go back to Don Lalo. When I look at this work, and obviously the title, These Horses Fly, they give a different sort of meaning. But, you know, you mentioned the energy, and I think with energy, there's a lot of strength. And, you know, when thinking about the ledger art in itself, there's all this resilience that is there. And, you know, with his lines, there's such thin lines on the legs. And normally, you know, you might read that as something that's fragile, but that doesn't really come through. It's actually, you know, there's a lot of strength here. So you know, that's more my musing on it, is that there's a lot of kind of juxtaposing lines and energy that really just continues to speak to all of those ideas of energy and persistence that you've already spoken to.
One thing I don't, I'm curious about, and I don't know, but the blue is not a classical color in Lakota or Dakota culture, and it's also there aren't a lot of blue pigments in nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but you see it in that Oscar Howe picture too.
Yeah.
That we looked at, or painting that we looked at, that they bring blue into it, which from a pigment perspective, it strikes me that would have been hard for them to paint, because there aren't a lot of blue flowers.
I wondered the same thing looking at it this morning. Maybe we'll have to do a coffee with collections with Don and ask him, right? But that's an interesting observation, Abby, because when I look at this piece, grace and power are the two words that really come to mind.
Yeah.
It's such a fine balance that he's achieved. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment about the material and where you get blues. My limited historical knowledge is that you get it from indigo, which is something that was grown in the South. So, you know, speaking to more like globalizing markets and access to those colors, but I'm sure that there's other ways to get the blue pigment. Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up. I'm sure you have a busy day ahead of you.
It's
And
good. Yeah, but I saw my warrior picture this morning, so.
yeah, you're ready to
I'm
go.
ready, yeah.
Great. Well, a very special thank you to all of our audience members and to all of you that are members of the South Dakota Art Museum. We do receive operational support from South Dakota State University and the South Dakota Arts Council. But your memberships help us make exhibits and programming like this possible. So thank you very much. We appreciate all of you and that you're part of the museum family. And a big thank you to President Dunn for joining us today. We really
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
It's
Yeah.
really been a treat, really an honor, humbled to be amongst art aficionados, because I'm really just a pretty humble person on art, so thank you.
It was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we've had folks from Alaska to Maine and everywhere in between, so.
Great. Zoom makes the world a little smaller.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Good for us.
Mhm.
Yeah.